What is the Gen Z stare?
What is up with the Gen Z stare?
Everyone keeps giving their take of a Gen Z stare. This is how they were staring.
Some say it's Gen Z's reaction to stupidity.
The stare has been described as a vacant, unresponsive gaze.
Some say it's the result of Gen Z's stupidity.
My girlfriend says to him, "Hey, how are you today?" Like, this world is...
I, being an alleged member of this Generation Z myself, might just be too stupid to know the difference between the two. I mean, if you don't know how to react to someone being silly, doesn't that make you a little bit silly? Putting that issue aside, the topic of the Gen Z stare is the newest intersection between TikTok trends and Juvenoia.
Sociologist David Finkelhor coined the term. It means an exaggerated fear about the things that influence kids these days. Juvenoia is a concerned disappointment that because of iPhones, or the internet, or TV, or rock music, or those pesky horseless carriages, the world just isn't fit for kids like it used to be.
There are plenty of idiosyncratic trends that Gen Z have cycled through. Trends like quiet quitting, quiet cracking, silent walking, and conscious unbossing, and more. But that can be a topic for another time. The question is, why is Gen Z so weird? Why does there seem to be such a distinction between Gen Z and previous generations? Well, let's discuss 3 of the factors that I think have the biggest impact on this. The first is asynchronous communication. For the vast majority of human history, almost all communication between people was synchronous. That is to say, it happened at the same time. When someone spoke to another person, that person had to respond within a few seconds if they wanted to avoid coming across as rude or absent. There have always been ways to circumvent this. Written messages, for example. But with written messages, whether that be letters, scrolls, or books, it was expected that responses would either take a long time or no responses were expected at all. However, in 1971, Ray Tomlinson sent the first email in human history to himself. That email wasn't him communicating to anyone. But it is undeniable that emails have fundamentally changed the way people interact with each other. Emails aren't synchronous, but responses were usually expected, while emails in and of themselves were more of an incremental iteration on the way people communicated. Fast forward to today, the vast majority of communication Gen Z engages in is in fact synchronous. A result of all of this asynchronous communication is a spike in self-reported social anxiety, where people of my generation have a harder time communicating with people face-to-face. You don't have a lot of time to think about a response to a question you're asked in person. At least you have a lot less time, in this case, than you would if the same question was asked through a text. The second big change is the content diet of different generations. Another result of the technological advancement in the modern era is the way Gen Z consumes content. At one time, the vast majority of content people consumed were longer format storylines in the form of TV shows or books. Nowadays, I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of what Gen Z consumes is short form content. Is that really a relevant difference? Well, yes, it is. In books or TV shows, conversations that play out are usually long, more complex, more coherent, involved in a particular context, and oftentimes don't have absolute resolutions.
Why not?
This is the nature of having a scene written as a part of a story rather than being a self-contained piece of content. Short-form content is a different animal entirely. It isn't uncommon for conversations in short-form content to be hyper-dramatized, incredibly short, and it lacks the different dimensions that make up real conversations with real people. Now, to be clear, conversations in books and TV shows are not like real-life conversations either, but they are a lot closer to what real conversations look like than the vast majority of what you might find in short-form content.
But I think we can all agree that 4 is in the bless you reign.
The reason I bring this up in the first place is because conversational reference points looked completely different to the introverted content consumers in Gen X than they do in my generation. A socially anxious Gen X individual would have had way more realistic content to reference when socializing than does Gen Z. Have you ever wondered why the 2010s don't have nearly as much of a unified identity as maybe the 1980s or the 90s. The shift in content diet I've been talking about leads me to the last point that I want to bring up, and that's the lack of shared culture in Gen Z. At one time, pop culture had a really big, homogenous impact on a generation. That's actually a bit of an exaggeration. There has always been a plurality of subcultures in every generation as a result of pop culture. The teens enjoying the Bronze Age of comic books, for instance, may not have been socializing with the early adopters of heavy metal music. The 1980s certainly had a diversity in pop culture, but it's undeniable that the 80s also had a pop cultural identity. The 2010s did too, don't get me wrong, but with social media algorithms funneling teens into their own pop cultural silos, there has been a proliferation in the amount of subcultures in my generation. From the explosion of World of Warcraft to the advent of Facebook groups, subcultures have been getting more and more specific. Okay, the subcultural identity of every generation is different. Why single Gen Z out for having more diversity? Well, like I mentioned, the increased amount of pop cultural diversity has largely done away with the pop cultural identity. This amounts to way more novelty older generations experience whenever they interact with a different member of Gen Z. This explosion of subcultures is, I think, the reason we've gotten so many odd Gen Z trends like silent walking or conscious unbossing, by the way. Members of a smaller subculture become more recognized for their contributions to said subculture than members of a nation-spanning subculture. Silent walking is literally the biggest trend for thousands of years, but the Walkman put a definitive end to that trend. Why take something as mundane as silent walking and turn it into a trend again? Because you'll have multiple news articles written about you if you can get that trend to catch on in your particular TikTok subculture. Alright, I've spent this whole video discussing what makes Gen Z different, why I think they're so strange compared to previous generations, why the tension between the boomers and the zoomers may serve as a dry tinder upon which a cultural world war might finally break out. But is that true? No, it's not. Gen Z certainly has its fair share of problems, unique problems in fact. I made a whole video about it. These problems may need to be addressed in serious ways, but at the end of the day, Gen Z is more similar to previous generations than they are different. Again, yes, we are different, but one whole underlying reason we are perceived as so different is probably a healthy dose of Juvenoia.